Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Fraad, and I'm bringing you the podcast, Capitalism Hits Home. Today, we're going to be talking about the idea that violence, in which America is a world leader, is a condom for the heart to protect the heart. Our show is about the intersections of capitalism with class, with race, with gender, with psychology, with emotion, and all the aspects of our political and personal lives. We are trying here to educate, to activate, to inspire, and also to alleviate some of the worst ravages of capitalism in the US on our lives. And I hope we succeed. And also, we always want feedback to let us know if we're succeeding, and if so, how. And we hope that this program, which is brought to you by Democracy at Work, will really serve you well. Sometimes just knowing what's going on is a source of some kind of satisfaction because you get a certain command of it through knowledge. So today, I'd like to talk about the idea that violence is a condom for the heart. Now, what am I talking about? Well, I think that one of the things you can see probably most clearly in sexual violence, in which America is once again a world leader. We are really a world leader in rape. We have the most rapes in the world, even though we're not the most populous country by a long shot. Now, here we also have to say that in the United States, although only 12% of rapes are recorded and reported, that is more than they are, let's say, in a place like India, where you are disgraced if you're the victim of rape, or some other places. However, we are still the world leader, even among other nations who have a reasonable record of allowing women to report rape, and like France or the UK, Britain. So around that kind of violence, we are a world leader, as well as around things like gun violence and mass murder. But I want to start there because I think it's particularly illustrative of the concept I have that violence is a condom for the heart. It stops the heart from knowing itself and from hurting. Because if you take sexual violence, you take the sex act, which could be an act of mutual need, mutual connection, and mutual pleasure, and you convert it into an act of domination. So the man who rapes a woman has the need to deny his mutuality with that woman, to deny his need for that woman by dominating her. And so his sex is a tool, his penis is the tool of domination, not of connection and not of need. But we are not only the leaders of violence in terms of rape, we're also the world leaders in terms of mass shootings, where we have the most mass shootings by far. I've mentioned before that in 1 month, we had more than one a day. And that's particularly interesting. Let's look at the parts of it. First place, mass shootings, 98% of them at least, are by men. And men are in much more emotional trouble in the United States than women are, because they are more plagued by the need to dominate. They are more mocked for their needs and for their dependency needs on other people. We have the bizarre myth of the self-made man, when everyone knows that people are made by other people and are gestated in a woman's body and then are the most dependent of all animals and have to be nurtured and cared for So nobody's self-made. We're not like Greek mythology where Athena, sprang from the head of Zeus, We're all created, and the human brain is a social instrument. When you're born, your brain is the size of a small fist. By the time you die, it's the size of a Nerf football. And each of the increases in brain size is sparked by an emotion and social recognition, because we are the most social of all animals. Our brains are developed through social connection. So nobody's self-made. If somebody were left alone in a cage when he was born, he'd just die, that's all. We don't even live if we're fed and diapered by somebody. We don't continue to live if we aren't held and talked to and hugged, loved in a sense by other people. And so the mythology of the self-made man is just an utter bizarre notion that denies our dependency on and our need for each other. In science and in history, you say, in Brecht's words, the Pharaoh conquered whatever, not him alone. And then he asked, wasn't there even a cook in his army? Nobody conquers anything by themselves. The great men of history. Well, who was behind those great men? Who was holding them up? The women in their lives? All the soldiers, the cooks, the cleaners? Really? And we have a basic class division in the United States, which is unmitigated by socialist and communist movements. We're unlike the rest of the world in that we don't have powerful socialist, anarchist, sometimes communist parties. If you look at a country like Portugal, which is thriving and has done well, it's almost cured its drug addiction problem that it used to have, and it has done well on COVID. For the last at least 10 years, it's governed by a unity of the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and the Green Party working together. All are non-capitalist parties. But with capitalism, you have a division between two groups of people, a very uneven division. Just as in slavery, you have slaves and masters. In feudalism, you have serfs and lords. And in capitalism, you have employees and employers. The employee has it drummed into him or her that he is or she is dependent on the boss, the board of directors. Whereas the board of directors seem to be able to deny their dependency on the labor of all those employees. It was particularly apparent during COVID, where suddenly they honored all these people that made life possible, calling them essential, even though they still didn't get $15 an hour, who were people who worked with food, who grew food, who transported food, who served food, who sold food, and so on. And certain caregiving occupations, even though our need for care is routinely denied. And so this division of employer who ostensibly doesn't need the workers who made him rich and continue to do so, and employees who are really indoctrinated to feel their inferiority and their position as needful of employment. We don't have a maximum wage that lets employers know that, wait a minute, you're enriching yourself on the labor of those underneath you, and there's just a certain amount that you can't take. It goes for everyone. Wealthy people don't necessarily pay taxes. I read that this year Nike paid 0 taxes. Trump made a big, boastful announcement about how he didn't pay taxes because only suckers, i.e. regular working people whose taxes are deducted pay taxes, that those lofty people who have no need, who only need their corporate tax advisors and tax lawyers on whom they depend, are without need. This whole idea of our interdependence is something that capitalism has a very strong need to downplay, because they want workers to feel like, we need you. We need a job to live, and you don't need us. One of the striking things that one sees in all the big newspapers in the United States is how now there's a terrible labor shortage. They've been emphasizing that labor shortage in the restaurant industry in New York. Well, if you don't pay people properly, they don't want to work there. Hello. And the Republicans are saying it's because they're spoiled by unemployment insurance, which isn't so generous that you would give up a well-paying job. What they're saying is there's a labor shortage of people who are willing to be cheated out of a living wage. Oh, that's what it is. And yet, as I look in all the newspapers around New York, nobody's mentioning that. Not the New York Times, not the Daily News, not the New York Post, whatever. So they stress that there's just workers aren't to be had, rather than they aren't to be exploited while the owner makes more money. And so that capitalism emphasizes the neediness of those who need to work for a living and the absence of need of those who make money off of hiring them, which is a perversion of the truth and a real problem. And it creates a dominance of the rich, whose money buys elections, whose money buys them positions. There's an easy corporate flow between government and the executive of whatever. Trump's great experience was, of course, getting $214 million from Daddy, but also being a businessman. Run this place like a business. Most businesses fail, but that's the mythology of capitalism. And Trump was elevated as a business success. He had divided his world into winners and losers and decided he was a winner because he cheated on his taxes. He declared hardly any value when it came to paying income tax, and huge value when it came to getting loans. Letitia James, Attorney General of New York, is looking into his lies around his debts, around banking, around insurance, and around income tax. But he is considered a winner by many Americans because there is this idea, if you're rich, you're a winner. And so that government can cite your qualifications as a wealthy businessman when they give you a position, rather than saying, uh-oh, he's an exploiter, we don't want him in our government. That's the propaganda that they've put out that denies the mutuality of need of all of us and creates systems of dominance and subordination. And those systems make ordinary people subordinate themselves from the inside out. They're what Althusser, the great Marxian philosopher, called ideological state apparatuses, which are apparatuses that make the mass of people discipline themselves from the inside because they believe they're inferior and they don't believe they deserve and they don't believe they're essential. And certainly our capitalist ideology promotes those beliefs in the rightful dominance and rightful subordination of the wealthy capitalist and those who are exploited by him or her. In terms of mass violence, we should look at, okay, who are the perpetrators of our very, very numerous mass killings, more than one a day last month. And in terms of measuring them, the United States has, well, France is the only other developed country that has mass shootings, and it's 9-1. The United States has 9 times the mass shootings of France. Over the last 20 years, we've had about 450, actually, since they stopped counting in 2018, and 2019 and 2020 have been big years for mass shootings. But we still had 450 compared with the average of the next countries with mass shootings, who had an average of 18 mass killings. So, whoa, that's a big difference. And when I looked at who are these mass killers, who are overwhelmingly men, a little more than 98% men, I studied who they were with as much information as I could glean from the internet, and they all had a couple of things in common. They were all disconnected men. They had lost a girlfriend or wife, or if they were gay, a partner, and they also had lost a job, or they lost a girlfriend, or, and sometimes both, a job, and they were disconnected from the rest of the world. The guy who shot all those people in Las Vegas some years ago hadn't had a job for years. He only operated as an individual. He did have a girlfriend who he sent away to visit her family when he did the mass shootings, but he didn't have any sort of vibrant connection in his life, because mental health depends on connection with other people. We're social animals. And one of the remarkable things about all of the mass killers is that they thought they wanted to take back power. They were utter narcissists. And if you're going to exploit people in capitalism, you have to think only of yourself, like a narcissist. You can't think, gee, what will these people feel like if they're shot? What will their families feel like, and their friends, if they're shot? In the school shootings, the guys who shot people had been rejected by friends or by bullies in the schools and by girlfriends. And they decided to take back power at the mouth of a gun. And they thought only of their own need to be empowered, and not of all the people's needs that they shot, and all the people's needs who had to witness this bloodbath. We're the only nation that has anywhere near the school shootings we have had. And we are also the lead military producer in the world, so that our economy is dependent on death and shooting and violence. I think of that when I see these reports of wars in Africa or elsewhere. I think, wow, where'd they get the guns to slaughter all those people? I wonder if they bought them from any of the world's 3 biggest gun producers. The United States, which is above all the others, has more weapons than the next 7 most prolific producers. Or the Soviet Union, which used to be the Soviet Union, Russia, which is next, and Israel, a bloody place, which is the next, a bloody place with the colonized people. At any rate, so the United States is steeped in violence, and I find, particularly in the time of COVID, it very interesting that we are willing to stockpile weapons that put us ahead of the weapon stockpiles of the next 7 most prolific gun producers. But we won't stockpile respirators or health equipment. It was considered very expensive to stockpile those. So Trump sold the nation's protective equipment, respirators, close our hospitals, because it's not really worth it. You can't make money off that. But somehow they're willing to give the military about $1 trillion a year and stockpile wild numbers of weapons that could destroy the entire world many times over. What are these priorities? Well, I think they're capitalist priorities, which is that you convert the mutuality of our need for one another into a goal of domination, of winning over people, of getting more power, more guns, more money. Look at Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, who is willing to give his warehouse workers COVID in order to get them to produce faster, even if they're in too close a space. And when they get COVID, we'll give them only 2 weeks off. And if they want any more, they can take the 2 weeks of anybody else working there who wants to give up her or his health insurance. Because he doesn't care. Because all he sees is his own domination. He's winning. He's getting more. And not the people around him who have less. The same thing is true on a sexual level. Who flew on the Lolita Express, run by Jeffrey Epstein, where you could rape underage girls both in the air and when you landed at Sex Slave Island? Well, Bill Gates was friends with Trump. He didn't go on the Lolita Express, but he visited the mansion many times. And anyone who visited Jeffrey Epstein's mansion saw him with a coterie of sex slaves who were hanging on him. And about every hour, he would disappear in a back room and do sex with them, and then come out, and they would be these very young, good-looking women hanging on him during all their meetings. Did anyone there of all those rich and powerful men, including Trump and Clinton, who did fly the Lolita Express, have any compassion for these children who were being sexually used? Did Aaron Black of World Financial Management, the richest of all the financial management companies in the world, have a problem with raping young girls? Did Les Staley, the president of Barclays Bank, think about it? No. You don't think about people who serve you. They're the invisible service agent. They're not human beings, which hurts your own soul and your own psychology because you lack any continuity and connection with the people around you, whether they're sexual servants or whether they're serving you at your workplace, which is managed often by other people who are serving you. That whole idea of dominance and subordination, which invites violence and puts a condom over the heart where you can't feel for those people around you. They're only there to serve you, and they're invisible agents of your service. That's why the people who are producing guns and have their gun lobby, the NRA, pushing the use of guns, aren't worried when we have the most school shootings by far in any other country. They're making money. And that's what's important. They're dominant. They're rich. So they can teach you that if you have a gun, you're a real man. And if you use it, you're exercising your manhood. You may be unmanned by capitalists at work who are giving you a lousy wage, but you're a man because you've got a gun. And they don't care that we have the most gun deaths by accident in the world, or that America, who's a leader in suicides, have the greatest number of suicides with guns, because if you're shooting yourself with a gun, it's the least reversible of all ways to commit suicide. because they don't feel the continuity between them and the human beings to whom their deadly products are going. They just feel we're winning, we're making money, we're getting richer. And Wayne LaPierre, who's now in deep hot water for using the money he got as a gun lobbyist to jet around the world and bring people along who he felt like entertaining for his own amusement, it didn't occur to him, I'm living off the blood of other people, because he was winning in a capitalist system, which trains people out of compassion and connection with their fellows. And you can see the continuum with rape as a tool of domination that denies mutuality and need in sex, and capitalists' employment that tries to get workers to work for less and declares there's an employment crisis because they won't be willing to pay, and that the United States should cut off and starve people so they don't get unemployment insurance, so that they'll be so desperate they'll take these lousy wages. Where's their compassion? Well, compassion is incompatible with capitalism. And if our goal as decent people is to free other people to enjoy a full life, we'd have to get rid of capitalism, of any system of exploitation, where you have people work for you and you get a lot more than they receive, and your goal is to give them the least possible and take the most for you, no matter what damage it may do to them. And in order to affect that, you create a whole culture justifying dominance and subordination and teaching people that they're not very important. They need you, you don't need them. So you teach them from inside out to be humble, to know their inferior place, not to organize, not to unionize, not to take power as a group together in their common interest. And that's psychologically really perverse. And ironically, no capitalism can survive unless they indoctrinate their children to do otherwise. In every kindergarten and nursery school across the United States and other capitalist countries, you teach children to share. Because if you said to Johnny, take all the tricycles and rent them out to the other kids, that would not be the message, because they would be uncivilized. And the message is capitalism is not only uncivilized, it's mentally unhealthy and barbarous. And we need to change it to an egalitarian society where everyone has a voice and everyone has an equal chance. So thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in again. Thanks particularly to Maria Carnamola and Liz Phillips, who work to make democracy at work possible and support democracy at work with their labor as hard-working employees. And also to our Patreon listeners who help support the show, because in this capitalism, we need your financial support. We're not financed by a government who wants all voices heard. No. And we particularly need you, but we need everyone to listen, to spread the program around, tell people about it, and give us feedback. Thank you so much from me and from Democracy at Work. Goodbye.